Well, my name is Jamie Stillman. I am the founder of EarthQuaker, founder, president, and product designer. Full title. I started EarthQuaker somewhere between 2004 and 2005. That's a little bit foggy. And at first, it was just making myself pedals and making some for friends, throwing them up on eBay. And at the time, the Harmony Central forum was a hot
Yeah.
thing.
Yep.
And I was selling through there. I was also working as a tour manager at the time, and I wasn't really taking making pedals very seriously. I was just doing it for fun. Then I had like a long break between touring and decided to like kind of give it more of a serious try. I did a little bit of rebranding. The earliest EarthQuaker pedals look like that.
Oh, cool.
So, not I don't know. Very different from now, but not too different. Um, I think also like if you really look, it says EarthQuaker device instead of devices. Um, you know, kind of came up with more of a scheme, like a branding, marketing kind of angle. I was working as a graphic designer too. Like that would be my professional job, doing really fun things like designing PowerPoints and trade show booths for
Hmm.
medical supply packaging printers. That was it. But just kind of trying to use that brain, the design brain, to brand the company. And then that kind of second launch happened like late 2006, early 2007. And it just kind of took off, like much to my surprise. Like I started getting orders pretty regularly and pretty quickly. And like I got my first US dealer. And then immediately following that, a Japanese distributor.
Hmm.
And I learned a lot from his name was Brad Fee, and he ran Tone Factor, and he had a pedal company called Mojo Hand, which sold to Cusack Music, and they're still operating it. I don't really know what happened to Brad over the years, but he taught me a lot, like real quickly, a crash course in the company. And it was just me at first. I was building pedals in my basement, you know, pretty regularly from 2007 till about 2010. My wife Julie would come home from work and she would kind of help assemble enclosures and stuff like that. And she helped set up the business side of things and do the taxes. But yeah, it was really just like a one person show for the first four years or so. And then in 2010, hired my first employee, Jeff France. He was with us just until this past summer. He recently left to become a professional audio engineer. Um, and by 2012, I had 9 people working in my basement. Uh, and it decided it was time to move out. My wife quit her job at the bank and came on to run the company, which she still does to this day. Julie Robin, she's our CEO. She makes all the important decisions that we make. And then we moved out of the basement, got our first shop, outgrew it in 2 years, and moved into our current headquarters, which consists of 2 big buildings downtown Akron plus a studio. And here we are today, 20 years later.
That's wild. And I can commiserate. I started our business out of my basement as well, and so it's interesting to see kind of how those things progress. But you said that when you first started, you only had a handful of pedals, and you said for 4 years you were pretty much a one man show. So, right?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so were
Like,
you
go ahead.
were you building, or excuse me, let me ask this question differently. Were you designing and printing all those circuit boards in house, or how are you getting the parts?
Uh, so I was designing the circuits, and then the earliest EarthQuaker pedals, yeah, I was hand etching the boards and drilling them out. That did not last very long. I think I made maybe like 100 pedals that way before I realized like that is a horrible way to go about doing things, and like I didn't want to do like strip boards and stuff like that. So I started drawing, getting circuit boards like professionally made, but I was still populating them. I was just getting raw boards coming in, and yeah, hand populating those boards. Everything was wired. I was drilling out the enclosures on a tiny little drill press in my basement, then taking them to my garage and spray painting them. And then all the graphics were done with a water slide decal. and then
Yeah.
you spray paint them again, and then hand assemble them. That was pretty much it.
That's pretty crazy. Well, and having been to your shop there in Akron now, it's really wild. I mean, because you guys have some pretty sophisticated machinery at this point.
Yeah, yeah, we have graduated to a totally different level. But I mean, to be fair, like the spray painting and water slide decal stuff's kind of stopped like 2008ish. And I started getting enclosures professionally, like powder coated and screen printed. But the rest of the stuff stayed the same, and including like up until recent day with EarthQuaker, like we were hand populating circuit boards. We had like at some point like 30, 40 people just doing that.
Really? Huh. That's
Yeah.
wild. And so, but you guys, I mean, as far as assembly, I'm sure you probably source some parts from overseas, but I mean, basically all of the design and the build is done in Akron, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not like manufacturing semiconductors or anything like
Right.
that, but
Right.
yeah, we do every single thing in house. We have one building that's dedicated to just the machining, the powder coating, and the printing of enclosures.
Hmm. Well,
And then at our main facility, we do all the PCB assembly. And it was about 2 years ago, we got our pick and place line as well as a wave solder line. So like the assembly now is fully automated. And that was like a huge learning curve for us. Like it's not like we hired a total professional to come in and just do this stuff for us. Is like we bought the machinery and now we got to figure out how to run it. So one of our guys, Brian Hill, just kind of volunteered to be that person, and now he's like a pro at running that stuff. It's the same thing when we got CNC machines in for the enclosures. Like we had no idea how to use all that stuff, and we had a friend who did, and we kind of hired him to teach us, and then like eventually like our guy Mike Stangelo, who's our current production manager who oversees all production, um, went to school for it, and then we hired another guy who like trained himself on how to write the code and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, it's still very much like I think we're a lot more professional with an operation, but it's still very much done in the same like DIY spirit. The like, I don't know how to do this, but we'll figure it out. You know?
yeah. Yeah, mess around and find out, man. And we talk about
Yeah,
our business all the time. It's like, no one's ready to make that move. You just kind of have to dive in. And I think that's what's really interesting too, because, I mean, when we live in this world now where, there's so many great options for pedals, all the way from extremely boutique to, you've got guys like yourself and, Walrus Audio and other brands that have been around for quite a while at this point.
mm-hmm.
But it's just really it's really refreshing to hear that there's still a lot of that sort of hand touch that goes into production of pedals and I'm assuming even
Yeah,
design too, right?
yeah, definitely. I mean, if you ask me, like, I still feel like we're starting out. I know that we're like established or whatever in the brands of today, but like I still nothing has changed with the way I feel. Like every day I'm like, oh, hope I figure out this problem, or like I wonder what we're gonna make today. Like, obviously we have a lot more math involved and a lot more people who are like professionals in little areas like IT and accounting and things like that. But for the most part, it's still like in terms of like a product development cycle, it's a lot of it is exactly the same as it used to be.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome to hear, man. So when you guys are, coming up with a product roadmap, and I know, for instance, like we've seen a lot of new releases that have come out from you guys over the past couple of years. I love the silos, the ledges was great
Thank
last
you.
year. I know you guys
Yeah.
have got a lot of good things in pipeline. Where are you drawing inspiration from that? Is it your team? Is it you kind of going heads down in the basement? Where do you get that inspiration?
So a lot of it is still just like what I would like to use. I've been saying this for years. I mean, that's kind of we've had good fortune with luck. I'd like to say, I guess, not fortune. With other people just happen to be interested in what I'm interested in. And that's really kind of like still the idea behind our products is like, what is it that I like at this point in time? Very rarely am I ever like, what is missing from the world of pedals? And let me fill that hole. Like, it's usually just what I like to make, I guess. And I can tell you, like the silos, the Aurelius, the ledges, things like that. Like that whole thing was something I conceived of, like right when we went into lockdown on the pandemic in this
Mm.
basement. Right now, I'm in my basement, and this is where EarthQuaker used to be run out of. Was I had moved my shop. Uh, I feel like this was like really early on when like everybody shut everything down and like no one knew if it was safe to go outside even at all. So I remember like going to our shop like in the middle of the night and running out with all my parts bins. I don't know what I was thinking was going on, but setting up shop down here and then yeah, just like now what? Now what should I work on? So yeah, it was just kind of that. I thought it might be cool to have like all these like really basic but interesting like effects like delay, reverb, chorus, things like that. But they each had like a kind of unique spin on like the different programs that were in them, and like some really simple ways of accessing presets. So like you could build a tape and an analog delay, and you could have them both like on the fly on your pedal board. It didn't take like a manual or rocket science to figure out how to use them. So that's like the kind of stuff that I like in terms of like embracing modern technology and the past.
I'm right there with you, man, because to me, it's like I still really enjoy and get inspired, I guess would be the best word with, older analog circuits, but the functionality to make things modern. You touched on something too. You mentioned, the silos and sort of the multi modes. So before we came, from backstage, Jamie and I were talking about some of his equipment in the background. I asked him about the oil can delay back there. Is that the one that inspired the sound on the silos?
Actually, everything that's on the shelf back here, this add an echo and the organ tone, and then there's two echo plexes, and then over here on this side that you can't see is a space echo. All of those like kind of like those are a conglomerate for the tape setting on the silos. Like
Yeah,
there's little pieces that I like from all of those in each one,
that's cool.
or in that mode.
And you guys, when you're designing those circuits, are you using any DSP? Is that all still mostly
Yeah,
digital?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like
You have some
all
DSP.
that. Yeah, like all those pedals that I mentioned, they're all DSP.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, I personally have loved silos, and again, the ledges is something that I've said since the release. Like this is probably the best all around delay you could put on your board. Yeah, I mean, excuse me, reverb that you could put on your board, just because you have all the different options there. Um, one thing, and I actually brought some show and tell because I grabbed a lot of my favorite EarthQuaker pedals, but the Palisades has been a favorite of mine for years. And I'm a drive junkie. I'm infinitely a tweaker. And I remember this was back, gosh, it was probably maybe around the same time you mentioned you got starting. But I bought Brian Wampler's ebook. I don't know if you remember this, but like Wampler
Oh yeah,
released
yeah.
this ebook in like '03 or something that was like how to mod your
Hmm.
effects pedals. And so I just went down the rabbit hole of like, oh, what does an LED sound like in this clipping circuit? Or what does a silicon sound like or germanium, whatever. But I really loved this pedal because it is like a Swiss Army knife of all these different options. When did you design and release this pedal? And what was your inspiration? What were you like me? Were you just a junkie of options? Is that what sort of led to this?
I actually for myself personally, like I hate too many options. Like it's like I
Really?
love like a set, like a confined set of rules to work within, and that's kind of why I like pedals in general. Um, there's a finite amount of options. Well, nowadays it's not like that. Nowadays you can buy a supercomputer and a tiny enclosure, but I like that. But I thought with that pedal, the Palisades in particular was this is actually kind of a byproduct of with Julie, my wife, coming on board. Like so many people would email us and be like, "Hey, which one's your tube screamer?" Because of course, every boutique pedal company
Yeah.
has a tube screamer on the line. Um, but I was never a big fan of the tube screamer, so we didn't have one. And then finally, she was like, "Can you just maybe work on one, see what that's like?" And probably not in those words. I'm sorry, I keep shaking around a lot. I Let me divert this for a second. I had a long weekend, and I took one of my daughters up to Detroit to go see Bikini Kill, and then we went down to visit our other daughter in Cincinnati, and it's right by Kings Island, this amusement park. And we went there yesterday, and my body is so messed up from all the rides. Like everything hurts on me right now.
Sounds like it was
Sorry.
worth it though.
It was fun. It was definitely fun, but it was just I feel like I need to answer for why I keep doing shit like this. Anyway, uh back to the Palisade story. Yeah, so many people wrote, and I was like, fine, let me figure out what is it that I don't like about this circuit.
Mhm.
Let me get that out of the way first. And I did a bunch of experimenting, and one of the first things I came up with was actually the plumes, but we didn't
Yeah.
make it. I thought it should be something more elaborate. So that's where that came in. It was like, I liked all these diodes. I liked all these settings for like the low pass filtering of it. I liked, this gain range. So it's like, well, how do I make all these options available within the pedal? And I did. And, that's kind of like the opposite of what I was saying earlier. Like, I don't like a lot of options. That probably has the most options of especially for being an analog pedal of anything that we've made. It's very, very tweaky. But eventually, like, that pedal, like, people seem to really like it for a couple of years, and then it kind of like ran its course. And like that happened to be around the same time that, I always found myself going back to the original version of the whatever my idea was for the tube screamer, which ended up becoming the plumes.
Yeah.
And we released that, and that like took off wildfire. It's pretty crazy, and it still is. It's still like maybe our best-selling pedal, I think, still. Um, I believe a lot of that is due to the price point, but I also believe it sounds really good. I think I actually have like I got a couple things that are interesting sitting here.
See, this
I'll
is the
show
fun
you.
stuff I love is seeing Jamie pull out the private collection here.
Digging around.
Yeah, I've always really enjoyed the plumes as well. And oh wow.
That is the very first version of Palisades.
Whoa.
That was like trying to figure out like, will this work? Is this a good idea? I never really make anything that looks like that much chaos, but it ended up being that way.
Yeah,
Trying
yeah.
to do it without the circuit board.
That's a
And
lot of
then
hardware in there.
the earlier version of the plumes actually looked totally different. And if there are any nerds left in the world who like old parts and stuff, that's what the first version of the plumes
Nice.
kind of looked like, as opposed to
Now,
what it looks like now. We never
are
released
those
one that looked like that, but
are those carbon comp resistors that you have in
yeah,
that?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Turned out it didn't really matter one way or the other. It was actually a little less noisy with the metal film resistors that we typically used. And it's even less noisy now that we're using the surface mount parts because they're better specs. But yeah, I mean, those are little things that like take shape along the way. I think, like a product's life cycle.
Yeah. Well, I also feel like it's really interesting as well, especially to hear you say, hey, it really didn't make that much difference in the sound. And I think guitar players in general are some of the most finicky in the world of just, oh my God, like if it's not this part, it can't sound good, or if it doesn't, have this special magic diode. But I feel like, at
Of
this
course.
point, with the advent of the internet and so many different options in education now, I think a lot of people have kind of come to the realization that it's not as big of a deal as we all thought it was in the 90s and 2000s. But so
Yeah.
and you guys with surface mount parts, you said you're actually improving the spec that you have on
Hmm.
those components, right?
Yeah. Like, you know, the, the surface mount parts are the move to that was kind of like twofold. One is through hole parts are just becoming more and more obsolete every day.
Mm.
And,
Yeah.
especially over the last like 5, 6 years, like, like half the resistors we used. I mean, well, of course, there's always replacements, but half the ones we were used to using were discontinued. All the transistors became obsolete, like all of them. We were in a position where we had tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, like in stock, so we could keep going for a while. But it was like, it was inevitable.
Mhm.
So it just kind of coincided with like a lot of stuff getting obsoleted and sales growing, that it was like kind of time to start looking at, let's do some pedal surface mount.
Yeah.
And what we found early on was there were some pedals like the surface mount parts you can get in much tighter tolerances than through hole parts where they're better manufactured. Um, was like the afterneath was like one of the first things that like it was like, okay, we sell enough of these that we can't really keep up with by hand, like
Mhm.
let's look into using a CM for these. We got to convert it over to surface mount. And actually I hadn't really worked with surface mount, so I worked with a friend, a local engineer who was like, he helped develop the new mode setting on the afterneath, but it was like, let's convert this board over to surface mount and see what the real differences are. And there actually was a big difference on that because the tolerances were better. The clock ran a lot more precisely, which to most people, I don't think they would notice a difference. But I did. And it was like we spent a considerable amount of time trying to get the afterneath to sound worse. So it sounded more like, I say that jokingly because that is technically what we were doing is trying to get a worse functioning afterneath out of like higher precision parts, but it is what we had to do. Um, and now, like there's always a sonic difference between something on the breadboard and then when you lay out the circuit board, regardless of parts type, like it's just going to be different. And that difference was starting to become like there's a bigger gap between here's what it sounds like on a breadboard, here's what it sounds like when we lay it out on a circuit board using entirely surface mount parts. 9 times out of 10, you got to make a judgment call like, is it better or is it worse? And most of the time, it's better. It's more repeatable, more accurate. So we just leave it at that. There's not a lot of finicky back and forth, like fine tuning between
Yeah.
those things. Sometimes with digital circuits, though, like you'll run into some weird issues that you got to resolve. But I think on a whole, old parts are fun to look at, fun to like hunt for and use in certain occasions. And yes, I do think certain circuits benefit from using like these old kind of out of spec parts. So on a whole,
Yeah.
I think parts type is as important as people really play into, unless like of course you're like trying to build a highly precise circuit, then you want to use the most like the best engineered parts you can possibly get. You're not going to want to throw like germanium transistors and like something that's going to control like a airplane or something. I don't know. Maybe you do. I don't know. I don't design airplanes.
Yeah.
I make buzz pedals.
Well, I would hate for my airplane to change course depending on the temperature of the germanium
Yeah, I
transistor.
guess I guess so. Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I think that's interesting. And so, I mean, first of all, you've heard it here from Jamie. Surface mount parts are not the enemy. They're, in fact, in a lot of cases, they're better. And I mean, for me personally, I think, when you look into pedals like fuzz pedals, like, okay, yeah, like maybe carbon comp resistors or, germanium transistors, whatever,
Yeah,
kind of bring that
there's
interesting character.
that's kind of what I think is like there's an argument to be made there. Like, one of my favorite pedal companies ever is Damn Differential Audio Manifestations. And like I can't imagine those pedals like just just all being like surface mount or whatever. There's like it's all part of the mystique of the whole thing. Like each one is going to be uniquely different. And I know for a fact that they're like really dialing in those parts for every pedal that they make one by one because I have made tone benders and fuzz faces and stuff with vintage parts and they don't sound anywhere near as good as like the ones that they, you know, release. Like
Yeah.
are selling. I'm sure they're making a lot of bummers before they're coming across the right transistors, like the right caps, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I do. I think it matters. It just kind of all depends on what you're going for with that. But I definitely don't think there's anything wrong with surface mount by any means. I won't even entertain the argument anymore about
Yeah.
like it's unrepairable. It's not as good as it's bullshit.
Yeah.
Bullshit you read on the internet and you want to believe.
It is. It
And
is Reddit bullshit.
the repairing part of it is just jaded old techs who are probably all almost on their way out who are like, this is crap. And the worst is like when they just think it's digital just because it's service mount, which is ridiculous. Um, all the stuff's repairable. I mean, of course, like microscopic. I don't remember the package sizes off the top of my head. Surface mount parts are going to be more difficult than others, but for us in particular, we chose the smallest parts that are still easily replaced by hand, in terms of the package sizes. And as a company, like we do a lifetime warranty, so we expect a lot of stuff to come in over the years for repair. So it's designing to be, designing for repairability so the shit doesn't end up in a landfill or people don't end up really unhappy, like if they accidentally fry it or the switch dies or fill in the blank, any of this stuff. So a lot of thought goes into that too when developing.
Well, thank you for debunking those myths because I mean, even myself, when I first started seeing a lot of, companies move into surface mount parts, and I'm a mediocre solder at best, but it's like, oh my gosh, like how would somebody fix that? But I mean, obviously, it's not that challenging for you guys, and if you know how to do it.
No,
Yeah, go ahead, man.
I was just gonna say no, it's not challenging to fix it. I mean, it's probably equally as hard as through hole.
Yeah.
Honestly, it might be a little easier as far as I'm concerned to replace parts on a surface mount board. It does require your fine motor skills to be a little more fine than other people's, and mine are a little bit weak. I'm gonna say that, but luckily, I'm not the one repairing the pedals when they come in. Um, but yeah, the surface mount stuff is just. I mean, it's also just the way that we think. The other thing I think I'd point out is like a lot of people think it's like somehow an easy cop out, like, oh, it's just surface mount Chinese crap, but it's not. Still made in our factory, and it actually requires a lot of skill.
Yeah.
More, I'd argue, and I think I'm right, more than any hand soldering could ever possibly require.
Yeah, I can imagine so. Well, and quality goes up as well.
Yeah.
So we got a question that just came in. So I think this is a good point. We'll take some Q&A. I'm gonna run another poll. So Daniel asked a question. He said, first of all, he said, thanks for taking time to sit down with us today, Jamie. He says, can you name an artist, past or present, and an EQD pedal that you'd like to hear them put to use?
Oof, this kind of stuff is hard for
That's a good
me.
question.
um, God, I don't really know. I don't. I don't know. Like, every time someone asks me questions about artists, my brain immediately goes blank.
What about some
I
folks
think
that
I'd
are
like
using
to.
them today?
I think I'd like to hear what Eddie Van Halen would have done. There's all the opportunity in the world to hear it, but I didn't. What he would do with a rainbow machine,
Oh,
stuck in
wow.
the magic setting, just stuck permanently in magic. I would like to hear what would happen. Um,
That would be some sonic
yeah,
mayhem.
I don't know. Yeah, I'd be curious. Um, yeah, I don't know. I always draw a blank. Yeah,
I'm
I
with
think that's
you
my answer.
on Eddie on the missed opportunities. I remember it was 2017. They came here to Birmingham and they were playing at the amphitheater. And I was like, and I was so busy. I was in a corporate job at the time. And I was like, man, like I don't have time. I'm not going to go. And then just a few years later, we lost him. And I was like, oh my God, like I wish I could have seen that show. That would have been so killer. But
Yeah, he's like I think my musical taste kind of lend a little bit more towards the experimental side, definitely more into punk rock than I am into, especially, I mean, Van Halen's kind of classic hard rock, I would say, but they paved the way for a lot of really bad music as far as I'm concerned. Um, but
a
I
lot of
love
hair.
them. I love Van Halen still to this day. There's like always a handful of those bands. Like, my musical taste probably falls somewhere between My Bloody Valentine and Van Halen. I feel like that's my main influence for guitars. Um, Never got to see them, which is kind of a bummer. Like I just kind of always blew it off. I don't know why. I wish I would have gone to see them. But I will tell you this is that we once entertained trying to figure out. We put out a pedal called Eruptor.
Okay. Uh-huh.
How much would it have cost us to get Eddie Van Halen to play just 10 seconds of eruption through the eruptor for a video? Like, we never really got very far, but it was a serious conversation.
Yeah, that would be killer, man. That would be a once in a lifetime for sure. And I see some names on our attendee list here of some of our members, and I think I know one guy that would have liked to have seen Van Halen as well. That would have been a lot of fun. Well, I'm popping out another poll here as well, and this one's around pedal preferences. So first of all, question is, what type of effect pedals are you most interested in? What do you gravitate towards? There's a whole gamut here. And then the second is, what's the most important factor when choosing a new pedal? And so that could be sound quality, brand, price, features, size, portability, aesthetics. So weigh in on those. I'm very curious to see. So it looks like, oh, we got a lot of delay fans, delay and reverb. 75% of our attendees here saying that delay and reverb are their favorites. Multi-effects, 25%. So it looks like 50% of people say that sound quality is their top choice when deciding on a pedal. Brand reputation is 25%. Hopefully we have some EQD lovers here. And then features is 25%. So pretty evenly split there. So yeah, that's interesting. It's for me, and I'm a delay and reverb fan as well. And enjoy listening to experimental music. I think that's cool. I also, again, love overdrives. That's one of the reasons I love Palisades. But another show and tell I brought is the Astral Destiny. And you talk about great reverbs. That one was one that I always have really enjoyed. Um, how long have you guys had that in the lineup? Is it relatively new, or has it been out for quite a few years?
Almost 10 years.
Really? Okay.
Almost. Yeah. Maybe 8 or 9 years, something like that. It's hard. That's a tough one for me
Yeah.
to remember. It went through so many changes. At one point, it was a multi reverb with no octave reverbs, and then it eventually became all octave reverbs. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things that ended drastically different from where it started.
So I did not discover this one until we became a partner with you guys. And I remember the first couple of times I plugged this up, like I took one of these home for a couple of weeks, and now I have one on my board. But it's
Oh,
always been
thanks.
it's always been a lot of fun. And I think that's again, and maybe we'll kind of shift here to talking about the future and what constitutes innovation, for pedals these days. But one of the things I loved about this was, number one, you do get a lot of those options. But secondly, I just heard sounds come out of this that I had never heard before. And sounds that you don't get when you're just recreating something else. Like you mentioned,
Yeah.
everybody has a tube screamer. God forbid we have another clawing clone that comes out, right? Or just things that have been overdone. But things like the Astral Destiny, to me, are when I get inspired about innovation.
Hmm.
How do you guys approach that, man? Like, again, and I know you say you design a lot of things that you would want to play, but what goes through your head when you're thinking about pushing the envelope of innovation?
Well, you know, I feel like this is me, like this past couple years, me at like a weird point. Like I'm very much still stuck in the way that I like to
Mm.
design, like what I like, and that gets simpler and simpler every year as people's tastes change towards like becoming more and more accepting of buying a pedal that looks like an iPad, and they're going to plug their guitar into it and
Oh,
impulse model the sound of the footsteps on their floor and mix that with you know some code that some kid in North Dakota generated from his specific like vintage tube screamer. They're gonna plug a funny shaped guitar in with no headstock and be like, I'm a genius. And like, I hate that shit. I'm honest with you. Like I hate the future of guitar right now. Like to me it looks like chaos and people stumbling to find a use for an archaic instrument in a modern future. You know what I mean?
mm,
Like it doesn't make any sense to me. So my path is like I know what I like, and I'm just going to keep making the stuff that I like. And I hope that there are other people like me in the world who are like, well, sometimes I like a totally bizarre reverb.
mm,
Sometimes I just like, the sound of a tube screamer, and I'm going to pull it off the shelf and plug it in and just dial in a few sounds and just play the goddamn guitar, as opposed to
mhm.
spending all this time on the technology of gear. That's my feeling. I say that I'm sitting right next to a Kemper. I use that all the time. But it's like I pull it out of the box, I put it on the deluxe reverb setting. I don't think twice about it.
Yeah.
I use it because out of simplicity. Uh, just to be able to like get a guitar directly into a computer with no thought. So, of course, my thinking on my own beliefs is flawed. Don't get me wrong, but like, I don't kind of don't want to know what the future of like guitar in general is. Nor do I feel like I can predict it. Like it does these last 2 years. I think you could probably agree are like chaos.
Oh yeah.
There's products coming out left and right.
Yes.
There is stuff that like makes no sense to me being in rock music, being touted as like the next generation of gear for rock music. I trust my ears. I've seen a lot of bands who use Axe effects. I've seen a lot of bands who have not a single amplifier on stage and run a DI out of their pedal board. I don't think those bands know what they sound like in the mains. I think they know what they sound like in their in ears, and it probably sounds sick. They sound like a CD out front. In a CD, supposed to be great audio, it is not. There's like sample rates and shit, too much high end. There's no like life within the instrument. And yes, I also know like ears are getting younger and ears are growing up on TikTok and used to the compression rates that YouTube uses and only listen through earbuds, have never heard what a record sounds like. I'm dating myself. And yeah, the standards for audio are changing just due to human evolution and technology. Like young people just don't know what it used to sound like. But for me personally, like when I hear all of this stuff, it could be the most innovative thing in the world. But if it just doesn't sound good, then you don't feel it. And if you don't feel it, what's the point?
Yeah.
What's the point of doing any of it? And like just to kind of go back to the beginning of my little rant here, the bands that I see that just plug direct in and are using all these models of all this stuff, yeah, like I said, sounds fine in the in-ears, probably out front. It is not the same. It really isn't. Like you're just not getting the frequency responses, like the things that I think create an emotional element of the music as you would if it was just plugging. I'm not like a pitch to use like all EarthQuaker pedals is a like plug your guitar directly into the amp. I don't give a shit. It's gonna sound better. It just is. And I think people who have been using like, Axe effects is a good one because it was just early on. And no, I'm not saying anything bad about Axe effects. Like it's an innovative product or whatever. It's not for me, but it's an innovative thing. Um, so many people who were using that when it first came out and were like, all my stuff is great. It's awesome. Like we sound sick. And then they go back and plug into their Marshall and they're like, oh God. And then they ditch it. I know a lot of professional musicians.
Hmm.
A lot of them have done this. They kind of go back and forth. There's always a middle ground though. Like I know quite a fair amount of people who have like handful of pedals and neural DSP on their pedal board. They have a real amplifier, but most of the front of house sound is coming from the neural,
Hmm.
like
Yep.
that kind of stuff. I see that probably being more the realistic future, like an amalgamation of both things. And then there's a lot of people using actual amplifiers, but not the cabinets, and they're just using like two notes running into the PA.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably a step in a good direction. But I do believe that music needs a human element to it. It's already too perfect with like everybody on earth thinks they're a recording engineer because they got Logic and they know how to use a grid, you know. It's like music is becoming too sterile, too mass produced by just about anybody. You know what I mean? There's no like danger or anything in it. And I do feel like that goes hand in hand with like the technology of the music. Like I still like I appreciate chaos over perfection. I think I'll till I die love Death by Audio more than I love like a plugin.
Yeah.
Like it's just how I am. So I think for me personally, my plan is stick with what I know how to do and keep doing it and hope that other people like it. you know, it could be viewed as us like not getting with the future, but I think there are plenty of companies making crazy shit like Chase Bliss,
Yeah.
Hologram, like they're doing amazing stuff with technology that I still think is like really unique and creative. Um, and that's like so far above my like patience and so far above my skill set as a product designer that like I'm not even pretend to compete with that, and I'm not trying to. And I don't think as a company in general, like everybody at EarthQuaker is like, we got to get 200 super engineers in here and build this thing. Maybe our guy Luke is thinking that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's just kind of. I think it'll just continue to. I don't know what's the term for ebb and flow. I don't know. I never use that term. If I'm using it right, I don't know. But like, it comes like people's taste comes and goes. Like the Line 6 stuff, like the M5 and M9 and all that stuff. That came out in like 2010-ish, 2008-ish. I don't know. Like when I was still pretty early on, and I was like, oh, I bought one and was like, oh man, that's it. That's the end of pedals.
Yeah.
Because you
And now
could
it feels
do
archaic.
anything. Yeah, you could do anything here. And then it was hot for 2 years, and then it just kind of went away. And then people went back to like pedals, and then for a little while was those and pedals. And it's like all that stuff comes and goes. So like, that's kind of that was like what solidified this thought early on for me is that there's room for everything.
Mhm.
There's
Agreed.
room for 100,000 more Tube Screamer clones. There's room for a million more clones. There's room for like a handful more multi effects processors. Please stop making them. Stop making this
I,
dual pedal.
I'm with you. I think
uh,
that's going to consolidate.
I do too, but like some people kill it, like it's I think it's proven. I don't own a neural, but I think it's pretty proven that like if that could be the pinnacle of like good sounding multi effects processor, a Line 6 Helix. I hear a lot of people talk about them. I don't see anyone using them, but like because everyone's talking about it, I think that they're probably onto something. It could be the future, and I could be blind. But I
Well,
don't believe that. I think that people do have quite a bit of like gear fatigue. We were talking before we went on with this, and I think that they have gear fatigue because of the position that we're all in, which I could go on about if you want me to keep ranting, or you could stop me and ask me a question, I guess, if you want to change the topic. But
well, I would agree on the gear fatigue. I do think that stuff for people. So there was a couple of really interesting things I took away there, Jamie. Number one, you made a comment about it's an archaic instrument that we're trying to force through this filter of modern technology. That was
mm,
pretty insightful, man. I think that's the first time I've really kind of put it through that perspective, but you're totally right. I mean, the guitar itself is, I don't know how many centuries old, right? But then, I mean, as far as electrification, Leo Fender in the early 50s. So, I mean, here we are, not even 100 years quite into having it in mainstream music. But I think that's part of it. I think I agree with you that it's probably hybrid in the future. And I think, you use the term ebb and flow. I always talk about the pendulum. Everything's going to go really far this way and then it swings all the way back this way and then really far this way. I saw a meme the other day. I think we reposted it and it was like a person on their guitar pedal journey and it's like year one and it's like a guy with a blues driver, right? And it's like year two, he's got maybe 3 or 4 pedals. Year five, he's got a pretty ridiculous pedal board. Year 10, it's like wires and knobs everywhere and screens and all this. And then it's like year 15, one pedal again. Right. And so it's
yeah,
that ebb and flow, that swinging from one side to the other. But I think that hybrid is probably going to be more realistic. Like I like 2 notes. I mean, I do not want to turn that Marshall up to the level of which it needs to sound really good. And what I love about
mhm.
2 notes is I can flip the attenuator, I can have it in the room. But if I'm recording, I can do it digital. So I think I think that's the balance, and I think the market's trying to kind of figure out where that exists.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much guarantee that because, like I said, I'm just like I got an archaic mindset to this, but like, I got a two notes, I got a Kemper, like I have all these
Yeah.
things, but it's like I'm not pulling that stuff out live to play a
Right.
show. I will still pull my enormous and pain in the ass vintage Marshall 810 cabinet out, my Sub Model T,
Yeah.
and plug the guitar into a handful of pedals into that. Like that's just how I am. You know, it just is. Like I could probably get away with a deluxe reverb now, but like I just like the big amp. I like moving air.
Yeah. Well, that's yes, that's it. And I think that the feel, that visceral feel, because you said something too. You said about, well, if you don't feel anything, why? Right? Like for music in general, why would you write music? Why do you perform music? What is the reason we all listen to music? It's to feel something. And
Mhm.
I think that's why artists will always love things. Just like the same way that you can get an iPad and draw, but a great painter is still going to want to use oil and canvas, right? Because there's something that's real about it.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that I mean most musicians I know still like to turn knobs, press switches, see what stuff does, and then they just again this could just be like the kind of musicians that I know, but it's just they don't want to spend a lot of time tinkering with stuff. They'd rather spend time playing music and then figuring out how to make a living out of doing it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I
Yep.
think for some, like if your brain works correct, not sorry, if your brain works this way, like you could plug your guitar into this computer and like dial up a sound, like just using straight out of the box, like Pro Tools plugins and be like, say, awesome, I'm ready. You know, and then there's some people that's really confusing. They just want an overdrive with one knob, and like,
Yes.
so it takes all kinds, and I guess it depends on like the kind of music that you're trying to make and everything like that. So everything that I say kind of comes from my
Hmm.
preferences. But I also like see a lot of bands. We work with a lot of bands. I see what people are doing. I know what people are asking me for. Yet to have a, I have never ever had a single musician who's a professional musician be like, you know what, I want something with more options.
Yeah. Well, hey, like back to this, and we talked about,
Yeah.
you said you really like things simple. And I felt like, especially as I've gotten a little older and into my 40s now, with music, I do enjoy kind of taking things away. I enjoy this because again, like I love overdrive tweaking or whatever, but like in the very limited amount of time that I ever had with kids and a family and a business and everything else that I have to actually focus on music, the last thing I want to do is go through 7,000 options and try to pick whatever's perfect. It's, keeping things simple. And I think that there's a beauty in that.
Yeah. I mean, I like to try to find that like weird line between like just the right amount of options, but they're all useful and they're all intuitive.
Yeah.
And then like really simple stuff. I will say, like from a design perspective, like, what is coming from EarthQuaker, like at least what I know that I've been working on and what's done
Hmm.
is even simpler than the most simple stuff we've ever done because it's what I'm into now.
Yeah.
Of course, that could all change or whatever, like at any point. But yeah, I like it to sound good and be immediate. Everything is musical always. You know, again, this depends on what your definition of musical is, but I think for the most part, it's all musical. Easy to dial in, easy to kind of set it and forget it. Um, and then I'll always occasionally like throw in like a weird kind of tweaker pedal because sometimes I think it just calls for it. Like the Rainbow Machine needs to be the Rainbow Machine. It needs to have all
Yeah.
those controls. Astral Destiny needed all those controls as far as I'm concerned because you can make it sound like total trash, total digital garbage reverb, or you can make like a really super beautiful, like atmospheric song out of a single note if you set it right. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
so like I felt like things like that kind of like call for it, but like I'm really like leaning more towards like I kind of consider it a mental reset. I always do a thing like every year where I just kind of go back to like why do I like pedals, and I build a fuzz face on a breadboard, and then I just start changing out the transistors, and I'm like, this is why I like pedals.
This is
Okay,
fun.
let me keep going,
Yeah.
and and I kind of reset. every winter and just build like vintage fuzz pedals for a little while and then move on with doing other stuff.
Yeah.
It's like more pertinent to EarthQuaker, I think, but it's like, it takes reminding sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
But
Get
I'm
back to your core.
still, yeah, like I'm not really playing guitar very much in bands at all
Mm.
right now. And that was like a big influence for like what we were working on. I'm mostly playing drums now.
Yeah.
But it's still music, and it's still like it's kind of changing my perspective on like guitar. I think a little bit, and like what the future is to come. Um, and I have been long winded on this, but I think like I was saying, a lot of this Earthquaker stuff coming up will be simpler, but I think it will also be kind of a little bit more geared with like using it alongside more advanced like supercomputer type guitar effects. And that's not to say we won't be making anything weird or super intense to use in the future, but it's like a lot of the stuff I'm gravitated towards working on when I come in every day is like that, like simple stuff.
There you have it. The future of Earthquaker is simpler, not more complicated. Well, we've got a couple of questions that came in and one last poll. So first question, John says, hey, first of all, great conversation. I love the backstage viewpoint of the creative process. So my question is, what is your favorite between the Afterneath or the Avalanche Run, and why? And also, which one would you recommend to a relatively novice user?
Um, the answer to that depends on what I'm doing, but I can tell you without a doubt, the Avalanche Run is the one that I just use all the time, and the Afterneath is something I use sometimes.
Agreed.
I think the Avalanche Run is a really just basic, straightforward delay and reverb if you want to use it that way, or it can be this really insane just soundscape generator, like if you're using it in the swell mode or the reverse mode, or you can turn it into a ring modulator, which was a joke for a little while with everything that I made that was digital, so you could accidentally get ring modulator settings out of it.
Yep.
And if you want to read the manual, which I think to this day is the biggest manual I've ever written for a product, I even forget some of its features still when I'm trying to explain the pedal to people. There's a lot of stuff that it does. But you can also just plug it right in, set it in the middle position of the toggle, and just have a very straightforward, very good sounding delay and reverb. So that one I would recommend for like someone just getting into delays. It looks maybe more confusing because it's bigger and has more controls, but I think the Afterneath has like a lot of like controls that maybe might not make a lot of sense at first, and like you'll start to discover what it all does and how it all works together the more you tweak it and turn the controls. And it's pretty hard to get a normal reverb sound out of it. You can, but it's pretty hard. And I think that one, again, I don't like to say stuff like this, but I'm going to point it out. When it came out, there was nothing like that. Now, there's a lot of stuff like it. There's stuff that's like it, but more predictable and better technically. But I will say I do see a correlation between the release of the Afterneath and what a lot of other people did.
Yeah.
So it's a very tweaky pedal. It is digital, but it doesn't have presets, and it's like it is the opposite of like what um I think Chase Bliss's like slogan is like the analog brain digital,
Digital heart.
whatever it is. You know what I mean? A lot of it is the like it's like digitally controlled analog circuits. This is an analog controlled digital circuit.
Digital circuit is the
because that's how my brain works. And it is tweaky and unique, and I think a lot of like happy accidents come out of it that are totally unpredictable. So it's like one of those things that like archaic by design right out of the bat, but sounded like really futuristic at the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I still love the pedal. We made a little slight upgrade to it by adding the modes for how the drag switch works. Mm-hmm. But otherwise it's pretty much stayed the same forever. But you need to be able to be willing to work within its confines, I think.
So another one I'd throw out to you, John, I love the Dispatch Master as well. And it's kind of like a little baby avalanche run, but it's still great delay, great reverb, small package. So you might want to check that one out. Jim has a question. He says, any plans on combining or creating a reverb pedal that has a tremolo with it? So I'm guessing kind of like maybe like a Strymon Flint. He said, also, how important do you feel it is or isn't to have an analog dry through with effects like reverb and delay? So two-part question.
Um, well, usually I'm very secretive about what I'm working on. But timely, yeah. I think that we will eventually have a reverb and tremolo pedal. Um, I'll just tell you whatever. I was working on this for the better part of this year, and then I just abandoned the project entirely about a month ago, much to a lot of people's dismay, because I got to a point where I was like, I think I've done all I can do, but I'm not that happy with it. So I'm
Mm.
going to abandon this for a while, and I will come back to it when I think I got a new idea on it. So someday that'll happen. I should also tell you that I am currently working on 40 projects at the same time.
Wow.
And I just kind of have an idea of like when things funnel into this position of like, this is very close to being done and this is all I need to do. Let me funnel that to the end. And I got a couple things ahead of that. Um, so that was that question. And then what was the one before
Yeah.
it in
And the
addition?
second, yeah, no worries. The second was, how important do you feel it is or is not
Oh,
have an
I think
analog
it's
drive
important.
through? Yeah.
I think it's important. Um, I have done pedals where the dry is run through the digital portion of the circuit. And on some regards, it's easier from a design perspective just to manage the signal that way. But I always find it's lacking something. So I will just kind of revert back to using that just the analog through. I think it's just better practice for my taste from a design standpoint.
Awesome. And another question from Daniel. He said, this is a good one. Have there been any ideas or sounds that you've been chasing throughout the history of EarthQuaker devices that you feel like you haven't captured yet?
Yeah, you'll continue to watch me struggle to capture them. Number one is the world's greatest fuzz face.
Hmm.
What constitutes world's greatest fuzz face will change for me at any given time. And I think I've cited this a bunch in the past. There is a recording of Jimi Hendrix, which I believe he's playing in France. And at the end of the performance, he starts apologizing because he's using like a British amp and French power. I don't know what he makes use for like the American guitar, like that none of it matches up with the country, but that guitar sounds like it's exploding. Like it just sounds horrible and awesome.
Hmm.
And I'm chasing my memory of that sound forever, where it's like big and full, but it also sounds like gated and blown out, and just
Hmm.
not acting right, transistors. Always chasing that. And then, just kind of like big wall of sound, Kevin Shields ish,
Yeah.
mid era Sonic Youth kind of guitar tones, like controllable chaos.
Yeah. Well, when you find that perfect fuzz face tone, let me know because I'm right beside you on that journey.
Yeah,
Man,
it's
I used
everything's an attempt. Every fuzz pedal we make is some attempt to capture some aspect of that.
yeah.
But
One of my favorite sounds from Jimmy was his Fillmore performances and like the new year of 70, 69, 70. And like to me, Machine Gun, like there's that when he first goes in the solo and he just grabs that first note and it just hangs and just explodes. Like every time I listen to it, I love it. And I mean, and I remember as a kid, like getting a fuzz face and trying, to get all those sounds that he was getting. And
yeah, I'll
it's
still. I mean,
real.
I should check that out. Like I like Jimi Hendrix, but like I don't have like much history on like live recordings. I'm sure there's a massive well to dig through, and I could probably find the sound that I remember having. I
Yeah.
should look for it. But I mean, I still like that's like those are the times that I get excited watching guitar players. Like when they do a thing, like just like a specific, like they have their thing that they do, and it's like it's repeatable, but like nobody else can repeat it.
Yeah.
Like they have this thing where like, they hit a note and it blooms and it just gets crazier and crazier, but they're not doing it. It's just how they know how their gear works and how their hands work and like the environment. Like they figure the stuff out. You can tell those kind of musicians apart from the ones who just want to be technically precise. And like those kind of people excite me. And those are the kind of bands that I like to go see.
Yeah, I'm with you. Well, last call for Q&A. If you've got a question, throw it in here for Jamie before we wrap up. I'll hold off on this last poll since we had just a ton of great discussion here. But just sort of in conclusion too, anybody that has been on with us, if you want to go back and rewatch any of this, we're going to post it on YouTube. So if you registered, you'll get an email from us with a link that will take you to that video. Please share it with others that you think might enjoy it. It's been a great chat with Jamie. So we'll also be making some social posts as well, kind of taking some pieces of this out. So again, one last call, open questions, or if anyone knows how to design the perfect fuzz face, we'll take that as well.
Yeah, let me know. If
I'm sure
anyone's
Jamie,
like offended by my taste in gear, or you don't like the fact I called your pedal a computer, I don't know.
yeah. If you got mad that Jamie said that your neural DSP is a piece of shit, please feel free to.
Hey,
I don't know. I'm not putting words.
I'm not trying to single a company out.
Yeah, no, it's funny. We have most all of those here. I mean, we do a ton of neurals, a lot of more line 6, honestly, than anything. We haven't gotten into Kempers yet, and I have probably the least experience with that one. But again, 2Notes has been a lot of fun. The Genome that they released software has been pretty wild. Again, that kind of hybrid amp thing has been pretty cool. So, here's another one. All right.
Yeah.
Todd says or asks, will EarthQuaker ever make a tuner pedal? That's a really good question.
Maybe. I don't know. It's not like something that I've like really thought about, but have considered like doing a bunch of like basic utility pedals just because I find that I always need some. It might be kind of fun to throw in with that. Did talk about it like briefly. Wouldn't it be funny just to go back and just make like a needle tuner and
Analog.
Yeah, just an analog needle tuner, and then try to argue that it somehow is better than that'd be like these are the right germanium diodes argument. You know, you know what I mean? It's like this one just sounds better.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's possible. It's very possible to make a tuner.
Yeah, interesting question. Yeah, and then market as well. I mean, like I guess the first one that comes to my mind is, Walrus has doubled down a lot of the utility, which is cool. I mean, it's, hey, everybody needs utility. There's always, I think from a branding perspective, I think you guys are a little unique. Although the analog, needle tuner could be kind of interesting. You'd have to definitely say that there's a germanium diode in there, and it's got a special kind
It's
of
a germanium
battery.
needle.
Yeah, it's a germanium needle, and the battery's, drained. What is it, like 7 volts, instead of 9?
Yeah, it's perfect. It's pretty exact. It's 7.3 volts.
Yeah, there.
It's got 20 feet of cable curled up inside. It's a unidirectional cable, and it's got the right kind of air, British air, actually, from like 1968, is inside the pedal.
Yeah, not just
that's going to be that's our tuner.
Yeah, there you go. That's awesome. All right. Well, Jamie, listen, man, thanks so much. I could easily nerd out for another hour, but it's been great having you. Thanks so much for joining. And for everybody else, thank you for hopping in. We always love putting on these kind of events for our members, and for even if you're not a member, thank you for hopping in with us today. So we'll send out an email with all the details to watch this on demand, and to look forward to having you on maybe again sometime in the future. Maybe 2025 we'll have another chat and see what else is new. All right, man. Take care. Thanks so much, Jamie.
I'll see you. Thank you.